We are live on YouTube and we are live on Twitter.
Ooh.
Oh.
Hi. Yay. Somebody say something.
Oh.
Hey, welcome to the Council of Fans podcast. I'm your host this week, Penguin. Joining us today is Fellowship of Fans himself as a participant for the first time.
Hello. Great to be here on the show.
We've got Lakitia.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here and glad to have all our fabulous guests tonight.
Our favorite elf, Nikki.
Hey, what's up?
Joining us, and also we've got Hen, our favorite pedant.
Hello, everybody. Thanks.
And and joining us this week is Robert of In Deep Geek. How you doing, Robert?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me on. It is an honor and a delight to be here.
Hey, we're glad to have you here. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Maura and Gare for their kind donations. Unfortunately, shilling for Amazon doesn't pay very well, and we're all tired of ramen noodles. So thanks to your donations, we're getting to eat from the McDonald's Valley meal tonight.
Yes, sir.
Never again.
Never. Oh no, you're gonna do it, and you're gonna like it, Hen. So this week, we're going to be talking about the Rings of Power and how they can feature in the show. Interestingly enough, titled "The Rings of Power." So before we dive into how the rings can feature in the show, why don't we first talk about what the Rings of Power are, at least according to Tolkien's own hand. Who wants to take us off there? Don't volunteer at once.
Penguin.
Well, you spoke first, Lakitia, so I want you to
No.
talk about the Rings of Power.
We're gonna talk about this later. Okay, so a little history about the Rings of Power. As we know, the Rings of Power were created in the Second Age, primarily in Eregion. So as we know, Sauron has returned to Middle Earth at the beginning of the Second Age. He tried to integrate himself into several different elven societies. He was received really, really poorly in Lindon, where Gil-galad and Elrond ruled, but he was received a little bit better in Eregion. So his ideas about making Eregion a really, and Middle Earth in general, this really fabulous place that could equal or resemble possibly Tol Eressëa or even Valinor, was received really well by the elves, who tried to make their homeland a little bit more, a little bit more fabulous. So basically, they created the elven craftsmiths created the rings under his guidance, and eventually, in secret, he crafted the One Ring. So, anybody wants to take over from me? Yes? No? Anybody? Possibly?
I think you're doing great. I will happily pick up again in a moment. I'm just letting people on Twitter know that where the new stream's at.
Right on.
I appreciate that, Robert. So,
I mean, as we all know, there's the verse in the beginning of the Lord of the Rings and in the book. So we all know how many rings there are, and that the dwarves were given some, the elves were given some, the men were given some. Yeah, they all have magical powers. That's pretty cool.
well, but we know that the elves created the rings for what they thought was a special reason. They thought they were trying to preserve themselves against the slow decay of the slow decay of the world, and that's how Sauron was able to deceive them. Now, what's interesting is that the movies kind of drop that. Who wants to talk about the movies? What Jackson did and probably why he did that? Henry.
I just think it's, he did it within the context of a short prologue, so he couldn't get too kind of cosmic with it. So he tried to sort of say these are rings they use to control the races. So the elves presumably use it to control the other elves, the dwarves, and so forth. So they're tools of dominion, which is, it's part of the role of rings of power, like Anver Vanut in mythology. So that's where it makes sense. It's the sort of thing that you watch it and you're like, oh, okay, as opposed to using them as tools of preservation.
Yeah, for the
And
sake
to be
of the
fair,
movie,
Tolkien does, he tells us that the elven rings are used for sake of preservation, but dwarven rings, for instance, are used to hoard wealth. They generate wealth. So instead of getting into all the minutiae of that, they just did away with it and said they're tools of control.
I think that's the main thing for me from the movies, was that Peter Jackson, he just contracted everything. He made it simple. He made it, this is about the One Ring. He said, okay, so we've got the 9, we understand there with the ring race. That's what that's all about. There are 3 elven rings. We didn't really major on them at all. That wasn't a big thing. We sort of saw a bit of a glinting ring on Galadriel's finger at one point. And the dwarven rings really, again, weren't a big issue. They appeared in The Hobbit briefly. But apart from that, Peter Jackson just made everything as simple as possible. This is about one ring. And the kind of implication from that kind of prologue was that they were all made with all of this as the big plan. Oh, I will give 3 to the elves, I will give 7 to the dwarves, etc. And as I'm sure we'll come on to, that wasn't the way it was in the books. In the books, that was Plan B. Plan A was this was all about the elves, because the elves that was who he was obsessed with to start with. He only got obsessed with the Númenóreans a little bit later on when they kept on beating him.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like how he solved it in a way that it worked for the film because the focus was the One Ring. I found that it was a little bit confusing with the Elven rings because of the storyline being a little bit different in the books. And also, he mentions it, but he doesn't mention anything about what it did to the elves or how it changed them, or the fact that it didn't change them. And then you see one ring on Galadriel's hand. No one really mentions it. And at the end of it, you see a ring on Gandalf's hand. No one really talks about them otherwise. And it's just you understand that they're magical, but there's no... it's just breezed past and you just sort of accept it because you're already a fan, and most of us probably have read the books and know what they're all about. So it's an interesting choice. It's a creative choice, which we're probably going to see a lot about in the series as well. But I mean, there are plenty of ways they can do it in the show too. So
yeah, I really like what you said, Robert, about how giving out the rings to everyone, that's Plan B after Plan A basically was an abject failure, and Plan B was only kind of a middling success. You've got the 9 ring wraiths, and I personally like to think that those kings of men that he gave these rings to became leaders and kings of groups, tribes, nations of men that came to follow Sauron. I mean, hey, if your king takes something and then all of a sudden accepts some magical trinket, becomes immortal, shows some powers, you're like, you know what? I think this guy knows what, and he says, hey, let's all follow Sauron. You see this guy, and you're like, hey, he's immortal. I think I'm going to follow him and hope that I can have this special nifty blessing too. Then, of course, the Dwarven rings didn't quite work out so well. It helped them get rich, so in a way, it's kind of like it's kind of self-destructive multi-level marketing scheme. But but anyway, from the lore, there's a lot of stuff that we can do with the rings. So kind of that leads us to Amazon. Amazon has a compressed timeline. One of the many concerns that have been voiced about those is how do you really show the elven fear of decay and entropy in that short of a timeline? How can you a lesser concern is how do you show the manosphere of death and uncertainty there? Because pretty much we all live with that every day. But how do you roll the concept of the Rings of Power into this show?
I mean, the show
one of
is
the
called The Rings of Power, so it's clear that it's going to be about them.
Yeah, it's
Or
not
at
going to
least
be
the-
glossed over. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
One
but
thing that-
how would you do them?
I
What-
just want to
what-
point out one other thing that confuses me is how they're gonna show the progress or the downfall of the Nazgul, because it does happen throughout a very long stretch of time in the books, and one of the things that is significant about them, and it's similar with Bilbo and Gollum, of course, is that the rings prolong their lives. So obviously we can't see that here. I think at best this show will cover a few decades or a few centuries perhaps, but not enough to
feel,
see
yeah.
their lifetimes being prolonged, and I'm not sure whether we'll get to see the period of time where, and again, something similar happened to Gollum, where they have this prolonged life, they have these extra powers, but they're suffering greatly. It's not it's not a life
Yeah.
that they imagined. So I'm curious how they'll tackle that.
I would agree
One of
with
the
that.
great thing. Oh, I was going to say one of the things you mentioned Gollum and his showing his downfall at the start of Return of the King was great because it appeared to take place over an unclear amount of time. Was this a week in his life? Was this decades? Was this a century? It's left ambiguous, which works fantastic.
Yeah, I
Go
think
ahead, Robert.
I would just add in. I completely agree, Lucky, to what you're saying about my biggest concern is with the ring race, with the 9 given to mortal men, because if you actually just take a step back and say, with the story that Tolkien's written, the 3 for elves in the Second Age, basically Sauron goes, aha, my cunning plan is coming to fruition, puts on the 1 ring, and the elves go, oh, it's not going to happen to me. They take the rings off. So that's not really a thing. The elven rings in the Second Age don't really, yes, they're exciting and interesting, but they're not plot specifically important. Similarly, the dwarfs, you distribute these, and the dwarfs go, what? I'm just going to dig deeper, and then they shut the doors and they dig deeper, and that's pretty much it. So again, this isn't central to the Númenórean plot. What the key bit of this is those 9 rings, and the thing I'm really looking for is, we know 3 of them went to Númenor, or Númenórean lords of some kind. What about the other 6? Are we going to see? We know one of them went to Hummel the Easterling. Are we going to see lots more about the Eastlings? What about the other 5? Where did they go? Are we going to see where they end up? So that's the bit that I'm fascinated with. But yes, the timeline compression for me, I don't know how they're going to do this, because they will have to show these have a huge, if they stick to Tolkien's plan, the ring wraiths appear, so they will have disappeared. The human forms will have disappeared before we get to that last momentous little bit of the story with the end of Númenor and the last alliance and things like that. So are they going to squish this down into 1 season? I don't know.
Well, and we know that the show, I wouldn't say no, but we're not aware of any rings existing as of the opening of the show. Barring any flashbacks, we haven't heard of them, the rings existing or the forging of the rings in the first season. So we're, if we're going to see the downfall of the Nazgul, that's got to happen pretty quickly. So, almost in a blink of an eye, they put on rings and then they start doing that banshee wail. Yeah.
Yeah, The Exorcist. Yeah, sure, that sort of thing.
Can I just say that I hope that eventually we get to see a short film that uses the exact same dialogue that Robert just used in his little description. That was amazing. Thank you.
What dialogue? About digging deeper?
No, and just the shouting and everything. That was just
Varking in the chat was very disappointed, claiming the dwarves did more than just dig. I mean, I know they polished a few jewels and things as well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Diggy hole indeed.
We all know the elves are the most important part of this show, so.
Amazon would seem to agree with you, yes. No, they would. I mean, their marketing has been very elf-centric, so yeah, sure.
Well, their marketing,
Could be a strategic
that's a whole other video.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
what
had
can
I
say.
like when I was thinking about this topic, I had a few questions, that popped up in my mind regarding how the rings themselves will be depicted and those who wear them. Like for instance, I was really curious whether they'll just go full on fantasy perhaps and show the rings help folk do actual magic, which is I don't think that's what Tolkien envisioned, but given that this show
And it's
is
not good. Yeah.
yeah, it's not good at, but I'm afraid given that the trailer that we've seen looks pretty high fantasy, like
Yes.
pretty out there, I think they're gonna be pushing the magical aspect a little bit further. I think this is where they'll try to potentially differentiate themselves from stuff like the Game of Thrones, for instance, and just show that this is more in line of potentially the Wheel of Time or something like that. I really don't want to see that happen, but that was something that I was curious about whether, like we talked about, are they gonna just present the appeal of the Rings of Power strictly in the power itself that it would bestow upon the bearer, um, or would they perhaps go into a more fantastic route? Because as we know, the nine could make the bearer invisible, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I
the
think
nine
so.
for sure were a little bit more on the fantastical side. The three rings were, like we talked about earlier, more about just preservation of what is and the healing and everything. So I could see them going a little bit further down the magic route here as well, with perhaps something similar to Aragorn's healing hand in the Return of the King, something like that. So to see them actually putting the rings to good use with a little bit more flair. So yeah, that's something that I was wondering and a
Yeah.
little bit worried about whether they're
The
gonna go
yeah.
the fantastical route.
Well, in Fellowship of the Ring, the Shadow of the Past, when Gandalf is talking about the rings of power, he says that the 9 rings given to men, they use them to become great kings, warlords, and sorcerers.
Sorcerers, yeah.
And so
Sorcerers.
just that word alone gives them an in to go down that high fantasy route. Now, we do have 2 people here who got to see some footage. Can you blink twice if you saw something over the more magical than what we saw in the Lord of the Rings movies? Go
They're
on.
like spells and stuff. Yeah.
Well, Varking's not here. Varking's not here, and I'm on not base cam, so
Robert is there.
you never know what I'm doing. You'll
I'm
never know
giving
what
you the
I'm
clue now. There we go.
Oh,
That's
wait,
the
wait.
appropriate
Can you
amount of
really
blinks.
dig?
I appreciate that.
Yes.
Square. What I will say though is that one of the things I love particularly about Tolkien's writing here, but also I think Peter Jackson picked it up in the way that he adapted this, was
Not a lot of
exactly what
magic.
yeah, it's very. You have to look for it. It's not like here's a spell. I'm casting a
Yes.
spell. You have to stop and think. Okay, so what is it? So when you, for example, with Gandalf's ring, and it's got these powers of encouragement for people we know. But you don't ever see him like, I'm now going to make people encouraged. You just see, for example, the effect when he's not there. The moment that he disappears and he goes down and he falls down in Moria, afterwards you just see the effect on all of the characters, and it's yes, clearly they've lost their leader and a friend and all the rest of it, but they're devastated. They think, can we even carry on? Is it possible anymore? It's and that's the and later on when Gandalf's riding through Minas Tirith, you can see the soldiers taking heart simply when he rides past them, and it's not that he's casting a spell or something like that. It's just Tolkien. He's just organically through the narrative showing the effect of the ring, and Peter Jackson did that. He never said the powers of the One Ring are X, Y, and Z. Similarly, he didn't say the powers of Galadriel's ring or Elrond's ring are these things here. We're left to just kind of go, oh, I can see a difference that is happening there, and the ring's there. Let's assume that there's a link there.
There is, but there is a little bit of a window for that magic. It's not just the words describing the ring wraiths as sorcerers before they fell. There is also, Gandalf doing a little lobbing fireballs in The Hobbit and Fellowship of the Ring against wargs.
But
There's
he's also kind of a
there's
Maya.
his anti-Nazgul flashlight. There is that scene where he's rescuing Faramir, and apparently he raised his hand and a sword flew out of, I want to say, Denethor's hand. I mean, that's borderline telekinesis. It's subtle. You can miss it, especially that last example, but it's there. So they do have a window.
Yeah, one of the ways in which you can ground magic into a story is to do exactly what you described, which is to, in a way that you're not sure whether it's magic or the power of suggestion or something. And that's the kind of magic that I like in fantasy properties generally. I like that sort of thing. And that's exactly the concern that I was going into this discussion with, which is I really don't want to see the rings do much of anything really at all.
Except existing.
I would be totally fine with the rings just being there and people thinking that they're important, but them not actually doing anything whatsoever.
Also, confusion about. I was going to say a confusion about whether a ring is a proper ring of power or just a magical ring, because it's easy to overlook. But Gandalf was there with Bilbo, and he thought, "Oh, you've got a shiny magical ring. It turns you invisible." And he gets his suspicions, and over time he figures it out. But for a long time, he just thinks this is probably just like a lesser ring. It's got some powers. We don't know what those powers are. And that kind of uncertainty, there might be other magical rings out there, but they might not be the rings of power. I'd love there to be some kind of uncertainty about
Yeah, because if you can forge those rings, you can forge other rings as well. So who's to say that there aren't many others around? Because there is magic and people are using it. So
but the magic,
If you go back to the Lord of the Rings, the movies, and you see the rings as tools of governance, how could you show that in the movie, show that in the show? Like, how would you properly utilize the rings as a tools of governance?
Two things. One, I don't think they'll do that because they're under no obligation.
That doesn't answer the question. Next.
And the other thing
I'm saying this is your assignment.
Ruling with a hard end.
I'm giving the power. I am giving I have the ring of governance over this live stream.
See that exact thing there is perfect example to how it can be used, right? You just zoom in on the ring. He's being crowned a king, and you zoom in on this dramatic ring, and you're just like, ooh.
No.
Behold the
ring. I'd be
Behold.
Totally, I'd be totally fine with barely even managing to see the rings. Like, I'd be totally fine with that if they wouldn't be too apparent in shots.
Yeah, but you have to remember, though, I don't think that's going to happen because it's called the Rings of Power, and it's also designed to cater to people who don't read the books. So they can't just breeze past it. It's important that they do something with it just because of the people watching who don't have the same relationship to this as we do.
Sure.
So I ask again, if you had to say the rings were tools that would strengthen your ability to govern or a personal authority or power, how would you do that in a show? How would you make that look believable? Like in a video game, you invested all your perk points into charisma and intimidation. Now make that believable in a live action production.
Okay, I will give you a scenario as you're baiting us into something. Let's imagine we get random Numenorian noble who is there standing somewhere in the city, and he's giving a speech, and then there's people like milling around in front of him, not really paying much attention. Normal politician giving a speech. Then you see close up of his hand, and he's playing when he puts a ring on. But then suddenly his words seem to take on this extra authority. People stop, they look, they start getting excited. Who is this guy? What's going on? He's calling them to action. What we need to do now is go off and do da-da-da. That for me is how you could do that, is you show the impact of a ring of power, for example.
Picture some of the King's Men doing that.
I think even more subtle than that. He just has it on, and he talks, and you're never quite sure whether it's the force of his personality or the ring. Yes, I think that works just fine.
And also the change could be seen when somebody who's given the Ring of Power previously didn't have a lot of charisma and a lot of just that oomph, and then all of a sudden he's this charismatic politician who people are drawn to. Like his public speeches go from being not exactly booed, but not being very well attended, to all of a sudden people being extremely drawn to what they have to say. This
Like a
could be,
non-successful politician who suddenly becomes
yeah,
immensely successful for no apparent reason.
yeah,
Except
something like that,
for
which also makes me wonder. And maybe that's the question for later on, or maybe not at all. But do you guys think that Pharazôn will be given one of the
I don't
nine
think
rings?
so.
That's
I think that's for a later, yeah.
I mean, it's going to be tricky
I-
because they're going to want to give a ring to a ruler of Numenor, right? Like, that's got to be a thing at some point.
My assumption had always been that the rings that were given to Numenorians would have been to, like, rulers of Numenorian colonies. For a number of reasons, really. One is that if members of the Council of the Scepter turned into ghouls in black, we would have known. And the other
but
thing,
it's never mentioned
yeah.
though, is it?
Who says the
Like-
Who says the Nazgul have to be wearing all black at this point? Why couldn't
Yeah,
they
but
be?
the-
Why
yeah.
couldn't they be wearing
Pink.
all gold and fancy clothes? I mean, this is the Second Age. Let's go
Yeah.
big. Let's be fancy. Come on, let's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we
And the
have to
other
think as
thing-
well that
yeah.
like what would be the most impactful for them, like, because it's not specific, like they're not mentioned by name, so we have no clue who these ring wraiths really are, all other than that they were powerful men, rulers of some sort.
Yeah.
So if they give one to him, that would be impactful in many ways and work in their favor, I suppose, because you see he's not like he's well, he's not friendly. And he gets gradually less and less friendly, so it could be like an addition to his fall, I suppose. But
There
I don't
is
know.
there is an issue though, which is that he's supposed to drown. So yeah.
Oh, well.
He doesn't drown. He
Yeah,
just
come on.
drowns and becomes a wraith. He
He
just gets
technically
He
gets
drowns
buried
in
a
evil,
cave.
is what you're saying.
Yeah.
yeah.
And this is where the timeline compression issues come into. You
Yes.
have to make some actual decisions here which will change canon. And I say this on my live stream a lot. I look at the camera in the eye, say this will not be canon, and I mean that in a positive way, in as much as this is not that they have to make change. So the Nazgul appear. So the people that Sauron gave the rings to disappear. The Nazgul appear, and then Ar-Pharazôn doesn't become king for another 1,000 years. That's the kind of the time difference. So having like the Ar-Pharazôn having a ring of power would not one of the 9 rings of power would not work according to Tolkien's original timeline. It's what they do with the time compression. Are they going to have the Nazgul only appear in the last season or 2 of this? I don't know. Probably. In which case, you have to say, if Ar-Pharazôn is appearing from season 1, say that maybe he could have it, but these will be changes.
I would like to see, like, that's one thing I would like to see, if they're doing that, not necessarily with him, but with someone. I would love to see the gradual decaying of the mind, at least for some of them. We don't have to see it for all of them, but I would love to see that storyline somewhere in there, whether it takes years or if it's instant or what. But I would love to see what having one of those rings does to a leader of the people. Because it could be someone who's genuinely nice. He just wants power, or he's been bullied as a kid and he's like vengeful and wants to prove himself to his dad, whatever it is. But then he gets this ring and he starts abusing it, and then he turns into the dark side. I don't know.
I had this idea a long time ago, and it was Sauron, showing up into a herd of, call it, rustic, pastoral men and saying, "Hey, who's going to follow me?" And basically, they all kind of look at him, say no, and a little shepherd boy, not a boy, but just a young man says, "Okay, I'll do it."
Theo.
And it's, well, it could be Theo, but
I don't think so.
it becomes like an inverse of a perversion of the story of David. He rises up following this God, essentially in his eyes, doing right, doing good, uniting all these people. And as time goes on, he starts to hear little whispers in his head, and he just kind of ignores them. And time continues to pass, and he still looks like a young, strong man, and people and his followers grow and eventually creates a religion based around the worship of Sauron because they see his high priest as functionally immortal. Everyone else wants that because they're all men, and that all living forever appeals to us. And over time, he starts to become more tortured, feeling stretched out, and the day he fades for him is horrible, and he realizes that he's been tricked, but he's got no real means of resisting. But to everyone else, it's viewed as the day the prophet ascends.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like Faust too.
Yeah, of course, that, I'm not sure how you fit that into a storyline, and I see that playing out over a long time rather than a condensed narrative that we have here. So, but yeah, how do people react to these rings, especially when Sauron has the one? Do they immediately become his little slaves, or is it a more subtle process?
I imagined it as a very kind of exorcist kind of takeover sort of thing, within the context of the show at least,
Yeah.
When do we think that he's gonna distribute at least the 9? Before he's taken to Numenor or after? Because if the timelines
very
are
difficult,
compressed, and we've speculated at some points that maybe instead of him being taken to Numenor after Pharazôn comes to conquer him during their own wars, maybe this is going to happen at the end of the wars of Sauron and the elves. In which case, that war is when Sauron gets hold of the rings in the first place, so he probably wouldn't have enough time to distribute those rings. So it could be that he only distributes them after having returned to Middle-earth.
Yeah. I don't know.
What if he has because the rings that got to Numenor would have to get there somehow, so what if he gave it to them when he was there? And then he's like, hey, I have these little presents for you guys, help yourselves. And that's the question I would like to know. The Witch King,
I think they
it's the most powerful ring wraith, so he has to be someone freaking powerful of a man, and I can't think of anyone other than Pharazôn. I don't know. I find it hard to imagine anyone else, but then that might just be me picturing what I know.
See, I always thought of the Witch King as one of the Nazgul who willingly followed Sauron and was rewarded with a ring of power, rather than a man who accepted a ring under false pretenses, thinking he could do good, achieve power, whereas this guy was rewarded and enthusiastically embraced this.
Sauron doesn't share power,
though.
Sauron doesn't share power. I mean, he doesn't share power, but he's rewarding a loyal servant of his. If that makes sense.
I actually
it's a form of patronage rather than deception in his case.
It makes sense. The only thing I would say to that, they're not going to give us 9 ring wraiths each with their individual stories. I mean,
no. There'll be some that will just be added. But
my thinking that they would focus only on the Witch King, really, and if they do, they're gonna want to make it more of a sob story than what you're describing.
Yes.
See, I always thought that Pharazôn could be a sob story. He may, sure, he's a, excuse me, we're trying to keep this PG right now. He's not
unfriendly.
A good guy, but he is looking out for what he thinks to be Numenor's best interest.
You can do it like that, sure.
I'm trying to make Numenor as great as possible. I'm trying to make my people immortal. Yeah, sure. Is he tricked? Is he deceived? Absolutely. But I kind of like the idea where he nearly repents at the end. Which is kind of a recurring theme in Tolkien.
He should be the hero of his own story. That's how this becomes good drama. Because if he's just a cardboard cutout villain, then it doesn't work.
Well.
I do like what you were saying about the Witch King. My headcanon is yes, he's somebody who was willingly following Sauron, but also I think that he was, the way I read that Gandalf description of the people who got the rings was some of them were sorcerers, and then this gave them extra power. So my reading is that because when we see him much later, he has got magical powers. He does do stuff that don't seem to just come from the power that the ring he has over him. I think that he started off as a sorcerer, then sold his soul for extra powers in this kind of Faustian pact, basically. That's my headcanon. I don't know whether they will go down that route, but I love the idea that he was a sorcerer to start with.
Be some sort of holy priest. with like
Yeah,
magic
I
powers.
could see that. The one question that poses is what kind of, I mean, what's that sorcery gonna be presented as?
Yeah, that's
I
yeah.
don't think they'll go particularly in any capacity with the rings or anything. I don't think they'll go the hard magic system way. I don't think they'll spend too much time delving into the intricacies of the magic system itself, but still I'm curious what all these, even if it's just the Nazgul who eventually turn into sorcerers and not the Witch King being one from the get-go. But I'm really curious how they're gonna depict that. Is it just gonna be something really ritualistic? Is it gonna be like, I don't know, thunder and lightning kind of magic, Taberlin the Great, just like this whole very, very flashy situation?
I would say I would
is the
personally either a kind of like an earthy magic herbalism, the kind of thing that the elves do. Is it really magic, but it's kind of like
Yeah,
working with
that.
nature, or necromancy of some kind? Because a
Yes.
lot of the
Okay,
theme of
yeah,
this is
yeah.
going to be trying to defeat death, and so
Yeah.
you could well imagine somebody going, "I want to be able to defeat death," and Sarah going, "I got a way to defeat death." So
Yeah.
that would work for me. Either of those two.
I kind of feel
Yeah.
like they did that kind of like that part they kind of succeeded with in the movies as well. With the whole like you understand that they're magical beings, you understand that they're damn hard to kill, they keep coming back. They're like there's this mythical air about them. So just doing something like that, it's subtle, but it's obvious that there's something. That's
Yeah.
kind of the way that I see them doing this. Like it's not going to be like Wingardium Leviosa, I do
Yeah,
magic, sparks
spells.
coming out of
Yeah.
my head. I don't know, but kind of more like there's a magical air, and you understand by the way other people respond to them that they are sort of magical and they have powers that you don't want to meddle
Yeah.
with.
Now,
Yeah,
Fellowship wants to jump in with something.
Ooh,
First
I
of all,
was.
hello everyone. I'm also on the stream. Hi
I
to the
kept him. I
chat
kept
and
him
everyone.
muted.
Yeah, I
I
can
just didn't
see
want to
my.
hear him.
I don't think people even know I'm in the video because I'm not even on the screen anyway. So yeah, hello everyone. I think the best way. I think a point mentioned about 20 minutes ago around how do you do it with time compression? How do you show the longevity of the effect of someone becoming a Witch King in that process getting denied due to you have to cut around 2,000 years or 1,500 of that happening from the Second Age due to time compression? I think the only practical way to do that is if you maybe have it as a kid and then grows up maybe into their 20s or something.
Yeah, but they
And
won't.
then
Yeah.
then you then maybe potentially now you see Theo, now you see this sword, now you see another clue that of course we saw in the footage that can't speak about right now as well, that it maybe you show instead of Theo. And you know what, Tyra Mohafidine, like once you film season 2, well probably he's grown a lot since when he was on season 1, and maybe if they are trying to go okay by season 4 to physically show maybe the effect, the longevity and effect to still have that theme without it being over 1,000 of years, you do it over a kid who then becomes an adult. And I think with choosing Tyro, if you go look at his, his social medias, Instagram, he looks like he's looks much older. So yeah, that could be a possibility of how you can do that.
I want a show of hands. Who thinks Theo, like in season 4, is getting recast? Because I don't.
You can make him look older.
Yeah, but he'll be
It's a
like,
thing called
you know
puberty.
what he'll
He'll
be
be an
like.
adult by then anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he'll age in the same way like what's her name in Game of Thrones, the kid?
Maisie, Arya Stark.
Maisie.
Arya Stark. That's the way he'll age. They won't like
Even
recast him as a 25-year-old.
no one said
I
he's
don't
going to
I think
think.
so too.
recast.
And I
No,
just think I just want to chime in here with a little something. It's been quite well covered, and I'm sure Robert has talked about it many times. But one of the things that George Martin has often said that he wanted to age a part of his cast between the books. He wanted to do a time jump of, I believe, 5 years or something like that. Robert, correct me if I'm wrong here. Just because it would be more plausible to put the characters through what he puts them through in the books or what he wanted to put them through, but then he ended up not doing it. But that's one of the things that the show has done away with anyway, and that was a problem that the show solved by having the actors age as they would, because the story takes place within a shorter amount of time, but in a TV show, you see the cast age. So
and
I think
it is
that will be
Sorry, go
solved
ahead.
by Tyro, you know,
Yeah. But
growing up pretty quickly.
let's
And it
assume
is
he's played.
possible as well
Yeah.
because even if you look at the Last Kingdom in like season 2, I think the person who plays the King Alfred, who later on becomes King Alfred, he's probably like 20, 21 years old. But then by like season at the beginning of season 5, he's meant to be like this 30, 40-year-old king, and they've gotten this 22-year-old guy and they made him literally look like a 30-year-old. I think you can easily do that with Tyro, and then you kind of compensate for the loss of that theme, especially with the Witch King. And of course, another idea is around the Witch King is maybe Hellbrand as well. But yeah,
Yeah,
obviously
that
talk
could
about the
be.
Witch. We have talked about. We could talk. I think, of course, it's Penguin's decision, but we've talked about the Witch King a lot for most of this. Then of course you have the other rings here. Maybe we could talk about the Great Iron Medane or Ostina Till as well.
You're right. It's my decision. I think we're gonna throw a bone to Varking, who's monitoring the chat, and talk about the Dwarven rings.
Talk about the
How-
Dwarven rings.
The Dwarven rings, they make you rich. How can we show Dwarven rings making someone rich? I mean, we
Again,
just
don't. Yeah.
In a similar
Hen, don't
way.
be a wet blanket. Let as a thought experiment. Just work with me, okay, buddy?
Yeah, sure. What I mean by don't is like you just show them they strike a vein of gold somewhere. You don't like leave it ambiguous as to whether it's like the power of the ring or just kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, force of suggestion, that sort of thing. Just leave it at that.
That's not fun. Let's just a thought experiment. The ring is making you rich. Make it. How could we? I mean, short of holding out their hand and letting the ring guide them to a vein of gold and an undiscovered vein of gold or mithril in a mountain, how can we demonstrate that it is the power of the ring that is making this guy rich? I mean, sure, greedy as well, but it's working.
But what if it's like one of the dwarves is like friends with Celebrimbor, and
Yes, he is.
what if he's like bullied by the others because he can't find gold and he's like so sad and getting kicked out, and then he gets a ring slipped into his hands, and then he goes and finds lots of gold and he's like, yay!
I think they might actually show it in a similar way that Peter Jackson showed the gold madness for Thorin. So have them show the dwarves become ever so slightly more ambitious, ever so slightly more gold obsessed, gold hungry, and inevitably pushing their their people to work harder, to dig deeper. I think they might go that route. I don't. I still think that the way Jackson did it was a little bit corny. I hope they're a little less heavy-handed with that. But I think, yeah.
Can I take
let me jump in real fast and
Go
say
on.
thank you, Steve, for the super chat for the 17.99. Go ahead, Robert.
No, thank you, Steve. I want to take you to the year 1697 of the Second Age, which you'll be well aware of, I'm sure. I have got something.
Of course, we all are. Of course, we all are.
But so this isn't just off the top of my head. But a lot of things happen in this one year. So this is when the sack of Eregion happened, the death of Celebrimbor happened, Rivendell was founded, the dwarves assailed Sauron from behind. So they take Sauron, who's then attacked Eregion, and Khazad-dûm closes. Now that is important for me because from that moment there are 7 dwarf clans, but we always have been, and probably again in this show, focusing in on just the one of them. So this is about one character. We're wanting to see the impact of this of a dwarf ring on a dwarf lord. It's on a character, and presumably it's going to be Adurin. So what we've got going on here is again, let me cast the scene for you. The dwarfs, they push Sauron back. One of the Durin picks up or gets given, or Celebrimbor earlier gives him a ring. And then he's being asked, what are you going to do now? What are you going to... You're going to join the fight? You're going to take on Sauron? You're going to push them back to Mordor? And then the little gleam comes into his eye, and he says, no, I'm going to dig. Or something along those lines. And then he shuts the gates of Khazad-dûm, and then that's that moment onwards. Yes, there are some dwarf interactions with the wider world, but they have largely shut themselves off, and that should be not just a matter of we're trying to defend ourselves, but we've now got a ring, and we're actually focusing in on the things that we want to do, which is digging deeper and darker.
Oh, that's a good point, which is
I like.
good. There's a good point there, which I thought about earlier today. Of the two Durins that we have, it's supposed to be Durin the third who gets the ring, the older one.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
just kind of imagining it in my head.
I really like what you said, Robert, because and one of the sources, I forget which one off the top of my head, someone can chime in with the proper reference, says that the dwarves maintain that Celebrimbor gave Durin the ring himself. It did not come from Sauron. I always thought that didn't make sense considering why the rings were made. They're tools of preservation against decay, stuff that would interest an elf, not just necessarily a dwarf. But now all of a sudden you have a reason for it. Celebrimbor could have given him this ring to keep it safe, and then over time it corrupts the dwarf Durin who holds onto it. And in order to justify that kind of corruption or whatever, and say, "Oh, we're not corrupted. See, Celebrimbor gave it to us, not Sauron. We're different. We're better than those other dwarves who took it from Sauron, right?" I don't know. I think there's an interesting angle that could be done there, which is hard to do in a compressed timeline.
If I could just build off of that briefly, I think it's important to distinguish between the three elven rings, which Celebrimbor made on his own, and therefore they didn't have as much. They didn't have Sauron hadn't sort of poured part of himself into there, so there wasn't all of the control and badness and nastiness there, which is why people like Elrond and Galadriel can use them. They are very much about preservation. They are about the things that an elf would care about. This is Celebrimbor himself pouring himself into there. That is probably slightly different to the ones that were made with Sauron there. So the ones that including the one that goes to the dwarves and Khazad-dûm, that will be from this first set, the ones that Sauron had an impact on, which may not just be about preservation.
But they still had that. They still had that effect because they preserved the Nazgul and just the Nazgul, and even the One Ring still has that effect temporarily.
Yes.
Or as it's
twisted version of that rather than what Celebrimbor's version was.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And a decision Amazon have to kind of, or JD Payne and Patrick McKay have to make is now with the three Elven Rings originally, before it did go to, of course, Círdan and Gil-galad, etc. First of all, it went just three random, well, not say random, but high Elven lords before they got sent into hiding, from what I recall. So will they just make new lords that these three Elven Rings will go to before it, of course, the Second of Region happens? Or will they just scrap that and just go with, of course, but then the problem with just scrapping that and giving it to, for example, because in the end Galadriel comes to Celebrimbor before the sacking happens, and it's like they decide to send these rings out, we have to send them into safety, and that's when send one to Linden, etc. So who is going to have these three Elven Rings before that happens? And maybe that's some of what the original Elven characters will have.
Ooh, I don't know.
Of course,
I always like the idea.
I'd say that the original. Oh, that'd be interesting. To be fair, he wasn't Khazad-dûm. The original Elven character we have right now is Arondir, so maybe he'll get one. But is he really an Elven Lord?
I would. He's a Sylvan elf, right?
Was that said in Vanity Fair?
Are they really gonna draw a distinction between the elves?
Yeah. Yeah, he's like a blow.
Celebrimbor will hand them to people who are close to him.
Yeah.
So they are staying in Eregion. It's not giving them out to elves in wider world. That comes later when he goes, hang on a moment, I've got three. I need to get rid of them. I'm going to go give them to Gil-galad, etc. So, but to start with, they were stayed local.
Yeah.
I like the idea of him giving out these rings to buddies of his, and who are wearing them when Sauron makes his own. And of course, yeah, they take him off. Sauron can't control them, but they're so traumatized by that assault on their minds that they're not really able to function afterwards. It's just like imagine, anywhere from, garbling case in a mental asylum to just having some sort of severe PTSD.
Would you give it to the Great Amadine then? Maybe it would be like one of the lead craftsmen there has like a reward on the Elven Rings. That could be a possibility and show the personal effect that it happens. When, of course, that's also personal because that adds on to the personal effect of, oh no, Anatar was Sauron, I've got this ring. So that is an interesting thing that, of course, the showrunners will have to, come up with and solve. One of the lot of things with this show, to be fair.
Yeah. I kind of feel like if I was wearing the ring when Sauron tried to control my mind, I would want to give it to someone like Galadriel because I know she's way more powerful than me and she can withstand it. Like if I was like a lower rank elf who's like just, messing around with a magical ring and then something like that happens, I'd be like, oh shit, I better. Like Frodo tried to give the ring to Gandalf. It's kind of like that feeling. It's like, yeah, this is not something that I want to mess with. Here you go. You can do it.
That's
Kind
good.
of.
They could play up that. I can see them play up that parallel.
Yeah.
But then again, I could also see them having Galadriel and Elrond be there when the rings are forged.
Yeah.
I think much more likely, yes.
And Celebrimbor being instantly, wow, I have these amazing magic rings here, milady. Do you want one? So I could see that happening.
I think so.
Like maybe the only reason why I would see him giving them away to somebody else, like to members of Gwaith Mirdain or just like random elf number 35, is if he was sure that these are just, the first stages, the very, the lowest of the rings, the lesser of the rings, because we know that the elven smiths first made them, but I think he would be aware that these are, great rings indeed, and would want to immediately hand them over to figures of authority or something like that. And we know that at least for season 1, Elrond will likely be in that part of the world as well. We know he's going to be hanging out with the dwarves, so I think it's reasonable to suspect that he might be spending some time in Eregion, and that could happen. I mean, that could take a while. He could be situated in Ostinethil as well, which would then make it all the easier for Celebrimbor to hand over the ring for Elrond to bring to Gil-galad or something like that.
I think that makes the most sense.
I went on a tangent there, but
No,
I kind of think that they'll go straight to the powerful elves, and
Yeah.
I think so.
It
I
does
agree.
Although
I
it would be a cute story. I don't
would.
think they would waste time because it's already like time compressed and there's so much material that they need to squeeze into these to keep it.
But you still find yourself streamlining things in the sense that instead of the ring switching free hands, they'll just switch too. It's just the
Yeah.
nature of telling a story visually. It just makes things more simple. So to have Galadriel and Elrond or Gil-galad at hand and having them take the rings immediately, either right before Sauron puts on the one or immediately afterwards, makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's the most plausible.
With the dwarven rings, like, because the dwarves are spread out as well, over
I think,
large
yeah.
areas of land. What would it make sense if like the rings are all given to like Durin or like the one big leader, and then he calls like a town meeting for everyone, and he's
Yeah.
like, look at these
Yeah,
amazing
I
rings
think
that
so.
I've been given, amazing.
I think so.
Worship me. And then he gives it to them and they go away and they gradually just decay in their little caves.
I do think all 7 will be. It makes most sense that they will be distributed from Moria, so the other dwarf lords come and they take them. Just again as a way of streamlining things. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And
yes.
it's a way of making him kind of like a bad guy in a way as well, because he's given the rings. So it's like,
Yeah, I mean,
That's an interesting idea. He becomes an unwitting tool of Sauron there.
Yeah.
in a way.
But I have to jump off. I'm going to leave Fellowship in charge. I'm now bequeathing my rings of authority to him. And if you have any questions, fire them off in chat, and we'll try to answer them to the best we can. All right,
Okay.
everyone. You
We're
all have a
almost
good
at
one.
the end of our time, so yeah, we'll just wrap it up. Right.
We've got 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Because we started 10 minutes later. That's fine.
Cool. So we have
Yeah.
10 minutes for questions, guys. Fire away.
So I have to be Rings of Power related, not in the title, but the show, but as in the actual physical event and the objects themselves. And the first ones, Robert, I think was from Kieran Curran. Would the rings initially be viewed with suspicion, given their unknown power?
Yes, by some, but maybe not by everyone. So the rings initially, we have Anatar, who is Sauron, obviously sexy Sauron, going around, and he goes to various places, and he goes to Lindon, and like the clever and wise people there going, yeah, not so sure about you. It's only when he gets to places where people are actually eagerly. So Celebrimbor is crucial in this because he actively loves creating things. He's the grandson of Feanor, who was the greatest smith ever, and you almost feel he feels like he's got a point to prove, and then somebody comes in and says, I can show you how to make marvelous things. He goes, yeah, of course. And in the original timeline, this is a long con from Sauron. This is hundreds of years he hangs around. So he's there for like 300-400 years, and you kind of feel you get to know a guy after 300 or 400 years. So by that point, I think basically everyone in that area probably trusted, but the wise who are slightly outside of that bubble, so we've got Galadriel, we've got Elrond, Gil-galad, Círdan as well, they will all be a little bit suspicious about what's going on. But I think we will see this little bubble happen around Celebrimbor as the rings are being forged, and those people will be all for it. And people wider will not.
Yeah.
Indeed. Unless everybody has anything else to add, feel free to, then we can move on to the next one. Cool. Okay, then. This is a bit of a more interesting one. So we've gone from bubbles to love triangles. And I've actually seen this. I think Sean Gunner, he's mentioned to me as well that he really thinks of maybe this happening as well. But do you think we'll see the Celebrimbor and Celeborn and Galadriel love triangle? What do you think that would work in any way?
Not as a love triangle per se, but the idea that Celebrimbor has a kind of fascination with Galadriel.
Ken,
sure.
is your name Robert? I'm
Oh,
joking,
sure.
continue.
Well, no,
love
that's
triangle,
an
though.
excellent answer. I would happily go with that. I think that I've no idea whether, and this, for those who are unaware, the whole what on earth was Galadriel and Celeborn doing in the Second Age and early Third Age it's the thing Tolkien changed his mind on the most, and it's got the most different accounts. So exactly what was going on there, we don't know. One of them, in one of these versions, then yes, Celebrimbor had a bit of a crush on Galadriel. A lot of people had a crush on Galadriel, to be fair. But I think that this would work really well with the idea that he feels he has a point to prove. Feanor, his granddad, also had a bit of a crush on Galadriel, so it's a little bit of a creepy generational thing going on as well. But the important point is that we should be seeing Celebrimbor as being the opposite of Feanor. Feanor turned the world upside down trying to get back these three magical things that he created. Celebrimbor, at the end of it, gives them away. He is the opposite of Feanor. Yes, he's probably got a crush on Galadriel, but he suddenly realizes that she's wiser and more powerful, and he gives a ring to her because she's a better person to have it than him.
And just thinking about it, first of all, I think Ken, sorry, you gave a good answer, but second of all, Charles Edwards is like 53, and Morford Clark, even though looks is 30, looks like young 20. So it'd be interesting, like now, thinking that you did choose an old Celebrimbor as opposed to Tom Budge, how if they did go for a love triangle relationship, how that would come out. And also, thank you, Reflective Rambling, for the $10 donation. And it says from the user Canadian Fantasy Corner, who is everyone's favorite second age elf? Then I think we already answered. Do you think we'll see the Celebrimbor Celeborn. We'll talk about that. So the first bit, who is everyone's favorite second age elf? I think we'll answer a few more questions, and when we wrap up, we'll each go individually and give everyone's
Yeah, that'd
favorite
be a nice wrap up.
second age elf. I think this is not really Rings of Power related, but I think I'll say it anyways. Do you think we'll see any Balrogs? Maybe flashback or even within the actual timeline.
I
/
wonder.
storyline.
I wonder that Balrogs.
Yeah.
Are we
Do you think
answering
we might?
this?
Yeah, you could see it in the
You know
in you know
yeah.
I was
They've
I
saying
do,
gone.
because there aren't that many like that kind of level supernatural monsters. I mean, I would like to see like at least some remnants or signs or it's some way, because we are going to see a lot of, like, hopefully we are going to see at least some battles. I'm not going to say a lot of it, but and I don't know.
I think a good way to say is, do you think we might see it in the first stage content that we see? Of course, I think what as well, like that little end of the first or that first stage battle, whether it's Daggle Braglock or whatever is happening then. Maybe you might see a dragon, a Balrog or two in that. Do you think that could be possible? That's a nice way for Amazon to get like Balrog
Sure.
creatures that side, because it's $1 billion show, so I'm sure they want something like that, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, they according to Tolkien lore, there were Balrogs in the first age, and then the next time we hear of a Balrog is in the third age when we get Durin's Bane, and the clear implication is that Durin's Bane went and sort of hid deep underground until the dwarfs, doing all of their digging, discovered him. So that's there, but because we've got a gap and because we don't have huge amounts of information about the Second Age, could there have been a Balrog appearing? Possibly. I personally hope not, because the whole point about when we get to Durin's Bane is that, wow, this is a creature of legend.
Yes.
One of these hasn't been around for ages, so that would slightly diminish it for me if there were a Balrog in the Second Age.
I once called that. There had been discussions on this before. I asked people not to Death Star the Balrog, which is to say, if it's in everything all the time, it starts getting it gets there's inflation, so to speak.
Yeah, they can't use them as war monsters, because then you're like, yeah, they don't seem as dangerous. The one in the Lord of the Rings is like terrifying because it's just the one.
Yes.
And even Gandalf is afraid of him. But
and by the way, the same is true of dragons. If you do a lot of dragons, Smaug starts looking a lot less interesting. Like it's or the Watcher in the Water is the same.
I don't know if they're gonna use too many of those because of House of the Dragon.
Sure.
I don't know.
I didn't think of it like that. Sure, yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Robert, how do the dragons in House of the Dragon you think will compare to any dragons you think we'll see in this show, potentially, like lore-wise?
That's true.
Lore-wise, so in House of the Dragon, this is the height of the Targaryen reign and rule, so we've got 20 plus dragons going on there. But the thing to watch out for there is, and I'm pretty sure they will do this, they vary hugely in size and scale. So a lot of them are literally only a few years old, so they're, imagine, like halfway through Game of Thrones, that kind of size. Useful things to have, but you can't climb on top of them and fly them yet. And one or two of them, Vagar is the biggest, have been around for hundreds of years old. And in George R. R. Martin's lore, then the dragon just keeps on getting bigger and more fiercer the older it gets. So one or two of them will be big and impressive, but nothing quite like the scale of the first stage kind of Ancalagon kind of stuff that we had in Tolkien's lore.
I still don't think that can be done right now.
No, what we do, I was just literally this morning when I was walking my dog, I was listening to The Fall of Gondolin on audiobook, and there's actually in one of the versions there, Tolkien does specifically say 2 dragons survived the first age, and I thought, I hadn't heard it that specific before. Obviously, this is only one of the versions he wrote, but yeah, so at the end of the first age, 2 of them in that version disappeared and headed off into the east, and that's where eventually we get people like dragons like Smaug coming from.
Yeah.
I actually think it would have been a nod to the red and white dragon of Arthurian myth, but okay, at the time.
Okay, this is a really interesting question. He said, this Varking says, my question is directed at Rob, but why didn't the rings give the dragons superpowers after they ate them? Come on, we need to give us an excellent answer for that.
Oh, right. 4 of the Dwarven rings were consumed by dragons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ooh.
It'd be a plot
theory
point in a
video.
way.
Because you have to put it on your finger.
That's an excellent answer. We could stop there, but I think there is another answer as well, which is that Gandalf, in a throwaway comment at some point, says that there are
Rings.
no dragons now that have got the power of the fiery breath that could destroy a ring of power, implying that there were. And so some of the ones that were around perhaps just before Smaug, the ones which were gobbling up rings, if the ring of
They
power
could
goes into them, the
destroy.
fire within
Yeah.
them was strong enough. Not the one ring,
Exactly.
but the dwarven ring certainly.
So they destroyed them as they
Yes,
were eating
yeah,
them.
yeah.
That's clever.
Yeah, dragon fire can destroy rings of power in Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Oh, you just muted yourself, Fellowship.
Yeah. That's okay, though.
oops. Okay, and I think for this final one, which I think actually one final ones, I think because Lakita, this is your second HO counterpart. Strider asks, which one is the most romantic ring, say for a proposal?
Not one of the rings of power.
Imagine that.
There's the ring of Barahir in this story, you know?
Mhm.
You're
I think that's
talking
what
in real life, like IRL, or
No,
do you
no,
mean
in-
like
outside.
in the show?
in the show.
In the show, I don't think I would
The most
propose to any
precious
of them
ring,
in the
surely.
show. But I would love to have Galadriel's ring made for a proposal if anyone wants to propose to me. I mean, that would be nice. But,
But okay, I think, of course, just to answer Reflective Ramblings original super chat, because we're getting to the end now. Let's start. So we'll go in the Discord order. So we go Chen, then we go me, then we go Carl. Actually, yeah, let Carl say it. Yeah, Lakitia, Nikki, and then Robert. Who was everyone's favorite second age elf? Go. Ken, that means starts with you.
Me? Okay. I'm actually just thinking about it, whether I like Celebrimbor the most because he's the most interesting. But I said before I see a lot of potential in Elrond too, but I'll go with Celebrimbor.
I would say Elrond as well. Not to go too much into it, but I feel like his character during this period is most relatable. And one things I worry about with elves sometimes is that if they're two of these angelic beings, can they be relatable to the viewer? And I think Elrond, hopefully in this show, and I think even in the second age for parts as well, because he's not the the high king of the elves. He's normally the healer. He's normally the person behind the scenes for a lot of it. Of course,
He's a lot younger.
founding of Imladris, yep, younger. So I think that is mine. Kyle,
Yeah, it's Celebrimbor for me. Easy.
Lakitia.
Celebrimbor is the correct answer, but I will also put Gil-galad in the spotlight. Like, he is the longest reigning High King of the Noldor. He's got this, I don't know, really appealing arc. He's got a fantastic predecessors, and he's been portrayed by Benjamin Walker. So I'm really looking forward to seeing his particular Gil-galad.
yeah.
Indeed.
Okay.
Also, I don't want to. I just want to quickly clarify my point. I think Hugo Bit says, "How dare you suggest an angelic being wouldn't be relatable to me?" I'm saying, of course, for us it would be, but because we're attached to the source material. But I'm wondering for an average general audience.
Yeah.
it
If
would
a
be much
character is
harder.
if a character is kind of ethereal, kind of holier than thou, it's difficult. It works if they're in a supporting role, but if they're the leads, yeah, sure.
Yeah, then
Difficult.
Kurt, I think also again, reflective rambling, thank you for the donation, the bravo, thank you. And I hope looks like we've got Kurt and the ship right in the chat saying, what about me? Fair enough.
Can
You
we
too.
also maybe let Robert answer the question?
Me?
Yeah, we get
Oh.
Robert's
Oh, I
last.
keep
Very
forgetting
well.
me.
Everything else?
You
Yeah.
guys, this is the second time. I swear to God,
no.
am I not a valued member of this council?
You are. That's
I'm
why we're
so
going to you
offended. I'm
next.
gonna go cry now.
Okay.
Well, I want to say Gil-galad as well, and of course my girl Galadriel. Well, I mean, she's my soul sister. We both got blonde hair. We both have the ears, you know. Of course,
Yeah.
I love Galadriel.
I will say though, you like Galadriel or the Galadriel that they seem to be doing in this though, because she's a bit different.
I think I will like her art, yes. I don't think I will like her all the time, but that's the way a hero's journey goes.
Yeah. Okay.
Fair enough, fair enough. And finally, to the special guest of today's stream, Robert. What about you, my friend?
Well, I mean, the boring answer is Celebrimbor because he is the most interesting. But I'm gonna shout out Glorfindel, who returns in the Second Age,
Yeah.
and after cruelly being taken out of the Lord of the Rings films, I
Yes.
would just love
Why?
for him to get his moment of glory because he is such an amazing character.
Yes, I agree. I
Indeed.
hope we'll see him from season 1 on.
Volking says, well, you should have picked Durin. Yeah.
Well, as elves go, he's quite a good one. It has to be said.
He's an honorable elf member.
Yeah, which Durin again?
Yeah.
We get two.
They're all the same.
Yeah.
Fucking joke for
Ooh,
you.
that's yeah.
Yeah.
I really wonder if that's something they're gonna go with. I know we talked about this at our previous shows, but that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. Let's see.
Indeed.
Indeed.
So, I think that's just about it for today. Of course, person who left earlier, the original host, Penguin, thank you for all you did earlier on. But again, thank you mainly Robert for coming on today. Really, really appreciate it. Hope you've had a blast.
I have, thank you. I mean, I meant it. It really is a pleasure and an honour being here, and even more of a pleasure having spent some time with you all. You are actually as nice as you appear, so this is
Aw.
excellent.
Thank
Thank you.
That's very kind.
Thank you, and hopefully we can do stuff like this in the future. So on, hopefully, maybe if the shill overlord Bezos ever asks us to go to any more places, we will get our nice packages in time. Nikki,
He just has to activate the chip in our brains now, doesn't he?
The most valued member, Nikki. Thank you for coming on. As
Thank
always.
you for having me, as always.
Really appreciate it. Thank you, of course, to Lakitia for coming in
Yes.
today again as well.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. This is a blast, and it was a real pleasure talking to Robert as well. So.
Actually, this actually stream was Lakitia's idea, so thank you to her for that. To be fair, of course, the person behind the scenes, Kyle, the person who
Lord
says
Kyle, the wizard.
Yeah, always glad to help out, and huge shout out to Robert for joining us today, and hopefully we can do it again sometime, but without the technical issues. That would be great.
Thank you, absolutely.
Mhm.
You're doing a great job, Kyle.
You're muted again, Fellowship. Did we thank Ken? Ken?
No, but yeah.
Thank you,
I
Ken.
mean, yeah.
Ken, you
We
know.
appreciate you too. You're also a valued member of this council.
Yeah, sure. And I always like as well when we have visitors. So yeah, been a pleasure, Robert.
Thank you all. I've been made to feel very welcome, and you're as well as being nice, you're also very knowledgeable, which is a rare mix. So well done, everyone.
All right, I think.
She was
it's time
still
for us
muted
to-
though.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, and
I
thank you
think
to our
Fellowship has left the
inquisitive.
building.
Yeah, and
Fellowship
thank you
has
to our
left the building.
And thanks for everybody in the chat. Thanks for
Yes, thank
participating.
you
We love
guys.
reading all your chat. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank you
for
so
hanging
much.
out with us. Okay, so see you next time. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, we're good. Yeah, we're good.